internet from a governance perspective. Okay, so what is governance? We'll look at that as we go along. But internet, the course will have both technical issues as well as non-technical issues. Some of you who have spoken have shared that they are lawyers and they can already see where they plug in. If we have the techies also, you can all, or you're probably in common ground, but there will be very new things as well, legal dimensions, human rights dimensions, data privacy dimensions that you probably have never thought about. If you're coming from the business side, you'll also have an issue related to e-commerce and what have you. So in essence, the internet is the new platform for practically everything: trade, study, play, entertainment. So the digital space, some will call it the digital twin. It's rapidly becoming what you have offline is really what you have online at the end of the day. Okay, so the slides are about 30 slides. I'm hoping we'll be done within 40 or so minutes, then probably have 15 minutes of Q&A. I unfortunately have a hard stop at 5:15 to jump into another class by around that time. So if you have questions as I proceed, I recommend you type them on the chat so that at the end of the session, we'll start with those ones and address them. So lesson 1, how did the internet begin? Again, this content is online. What I'm doing here is giving a big overview and perhaps getting those who haven't started a taste of what to expect. And hopefully they'll join the rest. So it was way back in the 60s when the Department of the Defense, the military guys in the US, commissioned a research on how to build a communication system that can survive, you know. Typically at that time, there was the Cold War. So you're looking at nuclear attack, perhaps on the east coast of the US. How, assuming the Russians attacked the east coast, how can the surviving unit in the east be able to communicate with the rest, perhaps in the west? So you needed a communication system that could be able to navigate across roadblocks, whether they're in form of broken systems or in form of jammed systems. How do you get a message from one end of the US to the other end of the US within the context of war? So that was the motivation. And these two Mwalimus, Robert Kahn and Vint Cerf, they were young lecturers in US universities on the West Coast. I think it's probably UCLA or Stanford. And they were tasked with that research. And they built the prototype of what we know today as the internet. Basically connect 2 or 3 computers together in the same room, and then create a software to allow them to talk to each other. If it works, then you expand it to the next room, the next office, the next town, the next continent, and you have the internet. So obviously they succeeded. And one of them is quite vocal in internet governance spaces. Vint Cerf will always appear in ICANN meetings or IGFs, very friendly guy. Robert Kahn seems to be more reserved. I haven't actually met him. But they created the internet as we know it today. Of course, it has developed further, but what we call the foundational protocols are the same. In terms of evolution, the 60s were a lot of research and refinement. And as I said, once it worked for a few machines, then the researchers could simply expand it. Remember, in the beginning, it was still a military project, top secret kind of thing. And so when they started connecting other computers, those computers were selected, usually public universities, or rather government-owned universities would get on board. Selected businesses will get on board, and pole the thing started growing within the US. So by the 70s, this internet, basically computers communicating through telephone lines. Okay. Satellite technology was not yet highly developed. So you're using your traditional telephone lines to send emails in the native sense of the word, not this sophisticated emails that we have today. Then come the early 80s. Majority of the universities in the US are now already connected over and above the military, installation. So it's no longer a military network. It's leaning towards a research network. So you would connect Stanford to MIT on the East Coast. And eventually from MIT, you would connect across the Atlantic to maybe some universities in the UK through satellite now. And once on the European continent, the next connection obviously became Asia, the Japan's, Australia side of things. Africa, we got in late in the game as usual. So the first internet point in Africa was, I think, around either Tunisia or Morocco, late 80s. In Kenya, we got on board early 90s, around 92, thereabout. And when we talk of connecting to the internet, we're talking through satellite. So a signal sent from a computer in the UK will be shot into space. Some satellite gadget will shoot it down to Nairobi. Okay, not Nairobi. We have, we used to call it Langata Earth Station. I think it's no longer functional, but the equipment is still there. Those traveling to Western Kenya may see it, or they removed it. I'm not sure. I no longer look. But that was the infrastructure in the early days. We could connect to the internet or to the global network through satellite communication. Now, something happened in the 90s, early 90s. Something that we are so familiar with today, a browser, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, whatever your favorite browser is, guess what? It wasn't there before the 90s. There was no browser prior to the 90s. So what that meant is that if you wanted to send an email in the pre-90s, you needed to be like a hacker or a tough scientist because it was hectic. You would send emails using what we call IP numbers. You would almost program the computer before it sends the email. It was not friendly at all. But somebody created the browser in the early 90s and changed the whole scenario, making it possible for any, Tom, Dick, and Harry to interact with the internet. Because the front end, as we call it, is now very easy to manipulate. In the 90s, the leading browser was called Netscape. Microsoft came in with its own browser much later. Internet Explorer, as it was called. And then several iterations later, we have other browsers around that continue to make the internet ever more easy to use. So that was the 90s. The 90s, you could say, is the period in which internet became commoditized, as in if you use the internet, it was not a big deal. You didn't need to be, some nutty professor in order to use the internet. You just needed a browser and a mouse and you're done. Then comes the 2000. Here's where we have mobile communication. This was also huge from the perspective of Africa, because Africa, remember I said the internet uses telephone lines. Africa, we didn't have telephone lines. Okay, we did, but there were very few. Just to give you perspective, in the early 90s, the New York, the city of New York City, as they call themselves, had more telephone lines than the whole of Africa. South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria included. The number of, those physical telephone lines we had in the whole of Africa was less than what one city in the US had. Basically, we had no internet. And even if we did, it will only work on those few telephone lines. So when mobile connectivity happened, it sort of enabled more availability of internet. If there was no mobile internet, a large majority of Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia will not be on the internet, because the cost of installing telephone lines is, very high. It's capital intensive. By the time you dig cables left, right, and center, you really need to have a good chunk of money. And then Africa populations at that time, and even now, are not in urban centers. If you're in Nairobi, 5 million squeezed there, it's easier to send cables to your building to serve 200 people. But if you think of rural, where you have one family in a square kilometer, it becomes expensive to push cable to each one of them. So this was a big change, mobile connectivity. And after that, internet was on mobile phones, and the rest is history. Whether you're doing email, you're doing television, education, entertainment. This is known as over-the-top services. The Netflix, the social media. They are over the top because they're able to do what used to happen on physical lines. A WhatsApp call is an over-the-top service because it is a call over the internet and not over traditional telephone. And it's cheaper in most cases. Most providers give it for free. So that's on the evolution of the internet. This one gives you a summary of the things to remember in terms of infrastructure. It's very simplified. Those doing computer science might even argue with me that this is not true, because the actual layer has 7 technology stacks, but we simplify things here. If you can figure the internet in these 3 spaces, you're good to go. Because this is not a computer science class. This is a class to enable you to debate internet issues from a point of knowledge. So at a technical level, you can see at the bottom here, internet requires telecommunication infrastructure. These are your cables. You can see a satellite dish here. You can see mobile masts, satellite. So that is the bottom layer. You can touch, you can see. Then on top of that, we have the protocol layer, you know, where Windsurf, this is what Windsurf created, TCP/IP. DNS came much later and other protocols, but they all ride on this main one, Transport Control Protocol. It's a piece of software that is able to exchange traffic or exchange messages from one machine to another. TCP/IP. Then at the top layer is, content layer. What you're able to see on your front end. This could be email, could be YouTube, could be social media. It's what Wanjiku sees. You and I are able to engage with what we call the lower levels using the content layer. Now, from internet governance perspective, you'll find that there are issues at each layer. There are debates in terms of content. Should we regulate the internet or not? Should we, for example, censor certain posts on Twitter, Instagram, or not? What are the pros and cons? There are debates at the protocol layer. TCP/IP, is it the best protocol? I think so. Otherwise, by now it will have been replaced. But there could be deeper debates about do the American as a country have an advantage over the rest of the countries in that they not only designed most of these things, but they continue to dictate how they evolve, while the other countries don't seem to have an opportunity to do so. And when they try, sometimes the Americans could decide otherwise. I can tell you for free that they call themselves the BRICS, Russia, China, India. Once in a while, there are disputes at this layer where they're saying that there's certain critical internet infrastructure that is not equitably distributed. And this Russia, China have enough technology to build their own internet. They can put together what the Americans put together, such that at the end of the day, we have two internets. And if you're splitting up the internet, then you're reducing its value. The value of the internet lies in its global nature. So that tends to be like a red card the BRICS countries always play. If they want something from the US, they flash that threat. And it's real. I mean, already they sort of built their own financial systems, where they're exchanging and trading with each other. Nothing stops them from building their own internet. So those of you who would be involved in such debates would therefore need this type of knowledge. How does the internet look like under the hood, so that you can approach those discussions more confidently? So the last layer is the telecom infrastructure. And even here we have disputes, okay? So for example, 5G networks. China has an edge in that space. They have built the telecom masts, the most efficient telecom equipment for 5G. And the other economic giants are not too happy about that, but it is what it is. The Chinese have invested in mobile communication. And so they are selling their equipment cheaper, faster, and more efficiently. And the rest of the world is taking it up. So if that trend continues, it is obvious that the Chinese will have an edge at that layer. So I'm just giving you possible international debates that revolve around internet governance and how they can evolve or emerge from this simple structure. So next is the topic around design principles. So why is the internet so successful? Because it was designed by Vint Cerf and others on this principle: openness, accessibility, and end-to-end communication. So I'm sure some of you have gone through the text, but in a nutshell, openness means the specification of internet is available. You can go to the internet, download it, and read how that software is designed, how it behaves, what to expect from it. It's open such that anybody, any innovator can build on top of it. If Vint Cerf had hidden it as a trade secret, it probably would have made some money, but not, the internet will not have gone beyond the US because nobody else would have understood it in order to connect to it. So the open nature is a good thing. It allows the internet to expand on its own without permission because the standard is open. The reverse of not being open is called proprietary. The lawyers in the house, trade secrets or intellectual property. So you'd have a product, but you and your shareholders are the only ones, or the management, who know what is entailed in it. The product then remains within your domain and you can make whatever money you want to make out of it. But usually you'll find that the ability to innovate further slows down because the system is not open. An open system means that not just, 4 engineers are looking at the products, but globally, all the engineers are free to look at the product, and obviously innovation will start sprouting from all corners of the globe. And that is what happens. If you think about TikTok, developed in China, WhatsApp, I believe originally in Finland or the Nordic countries. Of course, Microsoft bought them out. There are all manner of innovations on the internet popping up from any corner of the world because the internet is open. Accessibility. How do we connect? One of the principles is that different operators, for example, Safaricom, if they have an internet presence in Kenya, they should be open to interconnect with their competitors. So physical connectivity between different platforms was also one of the main principles. And that meant that the internet can be extended faster. It's not only open, but it's extensible. It can go wider than what one operator would have otherwise provided. And if you can reach remote locations, then you increase accessibility. But accessibility has another dimension. And this, at a global level, was pushed by the Arabic countries, where they were arguing that, yes, we have the physical connectivity, and we can access the internet, but it's all in English. So practically, we've been blocked out at a different layer, the language barrier, rather than technical barrier. So accessibility has the dimension of context. So you could have the signal, but you still can't access the internet because of language barriers. Sometimes even, persons with disability also have challenges in terms of accessibility. And the people who built the internet originally didn't think of that category of people. Rinsurf, native language is English, had no business thinking of Chinese internet or Swahili internet. It is later in the day that new users come on the table with new demands. And if you don't demand, you don't get. So the Arab world demanded for an Arabic internet. And I think in 2011, thereabout, they got their way in terms of the core protocol speaks Arabic. Because before then, if I may go back, this layer is in Latin. Latin is the, if you want, the alphabet of the internet, the Latin script. So with demands originally at internet governance forums, the Arabic world said we need the internet to be speaking Arabic at this level. We need it to speak Chinese also. They're saying it should speak Chinese at this level. Before then, of course, the Arabs could access the internet, but through translators. And you could say, that's fine, but they're saying, why should our access be translated while the other one is not? There's this microsecond delay and cost that we as Arabs have to go through that the others are not. So those are the issues that could be canvassed at the global level. End-to-end communication, this is sort of anti-censorship. The internet doesn't want red tape. If you send an email from China to Nairobi, it should come. There should be no middleman inspecting the email and deciding whether to forward it or not. So what the FinSurf guys did is to design this network in a way where we call it the intelligence. The brain power is at the end of the internet, on your device, on your machine, on your phone. All the processing and decisions are at the end, not in the middle. If you think about the traditional, even mobile network like Safaricom and its M-Pesa, the intelligence of M-Pesa is in the middle. Michael Joseph or his successor, Peter Ndegwa, can decide to receive your M-Pesa request and just throw it in a trash can because the intelligence is in the center. So for the internet, you want the intelligence to be at the edge, while the ISPs, yes, they are there, but they are providing a pipe just a big pipe to pass traffic. They do not have or should not have the ability to filter your information. Later on, we talk about network neutrality. It's based around the principle of end-to-end communication. If I'm in China, I want to communicate to somebody in Brazil, I should be 100% sure that as soon as I hit send, the Brazilian will get my message. That's the theory. The practice, as you'll see, sometimes is not as ideal. I mentioned China. They have this famous Chinese wall. If you are in Guangzhou and you send a message out of China, there's this little 1% chance that the message will not leave China because they have a firewall. But in the most of other democratic societies, there is no interference. And the internet works as the plan of windsurf. So the lawyers in the house, here is where you come in. So the internet design principles maintain or they align very well with human rights. Okay. So access, there are basic fundamental rights that after the World War II, the big economies or big nations at the time agreed that these are if you are born human, and I think all of us are born human, these are the basic rights. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, blue, or in between. I don't know if there's anyone blue, but if you're human, you're entitled not to be a slave, for example. And that's your right. You don't beg for it. It is given because you're human. So then you also are entitled to freedom of expression, freedom of association. You are entitled to, associate with anybody you want to. So those are fundamental human rights. And as society moves on to the internet, some of these rights are challenged because technology makes it easy to challenge them. So for example, if I want to deny you the right to express yourself online, I just pull the plug. And it's happened in most of Africa, where around election times, in some countries, the internet disappears for 2 weeks. Even our neighbor here, Museveni, does not joke. I don't know if we have participants from our friendly nation in Uganda. You'll forgive me for this, but there are countries that frustrate your rights online. And that's not a good thing. So part of the conversations in internet governance fora is how do we guarantee the rights of humans online? Some advanced countries like Finland have gone ahead and created laws that declare internet a human right. So if you're born in Finland, you're entitled to like 10 megabits per second of an internet link. The government must give you that because you are human. While on the other extreme, and I'm thinking of China here, at least China is, how do I put it? China is honest. It tells its citizens from the word go that, guys, we have a firewall here and we determine what you will see and you will not see. Some countries pretend that they are liberal or they're democratic, and then when push comes to shove, they start pulling the plugs. So you'll find that there's that range of situation across the globe. And if you're Kenyan, you have a responsibility to make sure that you push us to the right side of history as opposed to the other side. So you've got to stand out for your internet rights, your human rights as practiced online. Okay, now internet governance definitions. And I think I'll need to move slightly faster. In general, don't be fixated on internet. Just think of governance. What is governance? From a Kenyan point of view, when you talk of how is Kenya governed, what comes to mind? We call them the three arms of government. The president and his executive on one hand, parliament on the other, and judiciary. These are the governance structures because they provide checks and balances for the benefit of Wanjiku or the citizen. So it's the same thing with the internet governance. You want to discover who are the key actors, what do they do, what is their role, who checks them. Of course, the internet started in the US, so they're always going to have an edge. So the question will be, who checks America when it comes to internet issues or power plays? And you may not like China or Russia, the BRICS countries as they call themselves, but they are providing the check and balance, without which we will not even have ICANN. ICANN is the designated governance body for global internet, but it just happened in 1999. That's more like from the 60s to 2000. You're looking at 40 years of internet under one government, you may call it as such, under US. So by the time the last century was coming to an end, Russia and China were saying, no, this cannot be. That internet, yes, it started from the US, but now it's a global phenomenon. In fact, there are more internet users outside the US than in the US. So why is it that internet is then controlled by one state, one power? So that's where the debate started, and they were threatening to create their own internet. And so to manage those disputes, of course, America has to give in and say, okay, let's create a company actually called ICANN, where multi-stakeholder issues can, be brought to the table. So ICANN is that platform where internet is governed. It's an interesting space because it is not exactly what the Russians would have wanted, because, dictatorship and all that will have wanted an ITU type of situation where they would sit in the Security Council and have veto powers here and there. While on the other extreme, the US, of course, prefers a highly liberal situation where the private sector is actually taking the lead, while they keep you could call it the safety key, in case things go wrong, this is the key we shall use. So in the end, we got something of a hybrid. You have ICANN there, which is sort of a loose association of multiple actors, as we shall see shortly. And I think they meet 4 times a year to deliberate on these things. And we have other fora like Internet Governance Forum, where they meet annually and also discuss a lot of these things, some of which then get implemented by ICANN. So those are the two areas where internet is governed. And the issues for discussion are technical and policy. Technical being, the protocol thing, the standards, the TCP/IP, and then the policies, the social layer. So for example, if you're thinking of cybercrime, that's a policy issue. People stealing money online using the internet. So governments must come up with the Cybercrime Act, policies, expectations that society should adopt. So that's about internet governance. And there are various definitions. You'll go through that. But I've just given you the highlight of what it is. The various people who define it, if I could go back. ISOC, Internet Society, is one of the original custodians of the internet. Once the WINSAF, once the academia sort of gave it out, ISOC was the first institutional, and it continues to be one of the custodian of some of the key internet working groups. So if you think about the next generation of protocol, who is building that? They will be housed under the ISOC framework. Okay, so these are definitions by various groups. Now, classification of the issues. This keeps changing, but broadly speaking, you have infrastructure issues, legal issues, developmental issues, economic, like e-commerce, trading online, social cultural, censorship, content. So all these dimensions could be disputed by one party or the other. So how do you resolve them? You need an environment, a platform for debating those things. And as far back as 2006, IGF was such a platform, started in Athens. It's an ITU-related body. So it's funded, or it's under the office of the ITU boss, but it's largely funded by private sector and, well-wishers. And their intention is not hard rules. It's when you go to IGF, it's not about treaties. Treaties, you can have them in more state-oriented companies or organizations like ITU. IGF is sort of consensus-based fora where different parties come and meet, they debate, they disagree, and they go home. But from that interaction, they go home with one or two things that they have opted to implement. And nobody forces them to implement them. It's just out of knowing that this makes sense. So if, for example, you're a big tech like Huawei, you go to IGF and people are discussing some things that Huawei is doing and they're not happy with them. Just that environment, when you go back to China, you are like, okay, I think they had a point. In my next release, I'm going to change the equipment or I'm going to improve the software. So that's one angle of IGF. The other angle is some people meet there who also happen to be in ICANN. So they will take those conversations where now actual decisions are made in a more structured way or more should we say, demanding way. So it's still not a treaty. ICANN is still not, it's still consensus based, but it's more formalized, such that if ICANN makes a decision to implement this protocol by next month, it will be done, as opposed to IGF, where such decisions are not even intended to be the case. So IGF meets annually, and I think last year, were they in Japan or something? And these were the issues: AI, cybersec, data governance, human rights. So this course prepares you to be able to participate in such fora, starting with the Kenyan one. I think we'll have one at the end of the year. No, sorry, at the end of the month. So we will expect new voices. Some of us have been around for too long. We want young voices to come and drive the internet agenda for this country. And I'm assuming most of you are young in this, or at least younger than me in this class. And we want to hear your voices, looking at these issues perhaps from a different perspective that relates to you, the youth, and pushing the case that you want certain things to be changed at a local, regional, and global level. So these are the issues. There are frameworks for discussing them. I particularly like this one on, I think there's a body called Diplo. They came up with this cube where they would say, if there is an internet issue, you can break it down from what it is, whom it concerns, those are the actors, and where it can be resolved. So if you look at cybercrime as an issue, you go on this side of the cube, whom does it affect? And cybercrime could be solved locally, regionally, etc. So it's a framework in which you go prepared for debate because you have a structured way of deconstructing the issue and then, presenting it to your peers. So this is the ICANN ecosystem. This body formed in the late 90s. They have a group for names and address. A name is like KeSIG.org. I don't know if we are .org or .or.ke, or it is like CNN.com. The naming internet names. Then addressing. Each internet name has a number. So that's the address. Okay, so in your course content, I think there's a place where you discuss IP numbers. Each device communicating on the internet must have a unique number. So there's a group of institutions that manage that. Okay, then you have regional, national, and local policy development groups, government, capacity building, users. So there's a whole user group, part of the internet governance structure with leaders elected every so often. Then you have technical operations. So in your notes, they'll introduce root servers, CCTLD. So these are technical components of the internet, like the building blocks, what makes internet happen from a technical perspective. So they also have representation within the ICANN system. Then you have the standards development teams. You can see ISOC there. So ICANN is made up of all this group of stakeholders to try and make the discussions more balanced. The next lesson will be on the key national and transnational organizations in this environment. So you have the engineering task force. So these are the people who build the next generation protocols, technologies for the internet, and they discuss also. They don't dictate. So you have representation from across the world, academia, businesses, and they have their own heated debates. You have the browser group, this Worldwide Web Consortium. You have electrical engineers, more on the equipment side. So these are some of the bodies that contribute to the standards. You have ICANN. This is the key body that manages the internet. In terms of global positioning, there's always some tension between ICANN and ITU, because ITU has traditionally been in charge of telecommunication, the traditional telephony, satellite, radio frequency kind of thing, while ICANN is the new kid on the block with internet issues. So obviously, internet going forward is going to be more and more prominent if it already hasn't, as compared to, for example, a physical telephone line. So at a global level, there has been tension where ITU wants to do things that ICANN is currently doing. And also, ICANN, just because of evolution, is eating into ITU's role. If you think about a WhatsApp call, ITU has no control on a WhatsApp call. Yet the WhatsApp call is replacing the physical telephony that used to pay salaries for ITU people. So these are the facts of the times, and it's expected that ITU will not sit down as the new kids on the block come to eat their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have regional internet registries. So what they did at the ICANN level is to divide the numbering system and say, Africa, these are your numbers. Asia, these are your numbers. US, Latin America. So those are called regional internet registries. Their role is to manage IP numbers. Like on mobile numbering, we have 0721 for Safaricom, 07, I don't know what, for Airtel. So even the internet world, different operators have different numbers that eventually they dish to your computer, to your router at home, and to your phone. So there's a body that manages those numbers. There are usually attempts by governments to be the ones managing those numbers, but ICANN always pushes back and say we have regional internet registries, which are just technical organizations managed by multi-stakeholders, community representatives. So they have elections every now and often, and you're free to vote for whoever you want to manage these numbers per continent. So you can imagine, or you can see that the internet is still very loose organization. And the beauty with that is that you cut down on bureaucratic tape. You can imagine if, let me enjoy my own regulator. I know there could be people from Communication Authority, but let's assume Communication Authority is in charge of internet numbers. And you are an ISP and you apply to get those numbers so that you can give them to your customers. And then you happen to be an ISP that within the current context that used to belong to Kenyatta family, for example. And now Kenyatta is gone. There is this reality that you may not get your numbers just because the government has changed. So there is beauty in making sure that these numbers are not attached to government and are instead attached to some multi-stakeholder organizations. Of course, they also do have their issues, deep issues at times, but at the end of the day, some would say it's better the devil you know. So this IXP's Regional Internet Registry in Kenya, we have an IXP, which is a local internet exchange point. So if you're subscribed to Safaricom and you send an email to somebody subscribed to Airtel, their messages don't need to go all the way across the world and back. The messages can be exchanged right here in Nairobi or in Mombasa. We have those two exchange points. This means that countries that don't have an exchange point, and there are many, their traffic goes around the globe, even if it's just going to the neighbor's computer. It has to leave the country and come back. So these are the key actors. I can see I'm now quite time bad. Let's see if we can move faster. Multi-stakeholderism is a concept that says we are all equal when it comes to internet issues. So if I have a point as Wanjiku and my minister Owalo has a point as a minister, we put those points on the table. Then everybody listens to the merit and demerits of either point. If my point as Wanjiku makes more sense than my minister's point, majority wins. It becomes, in quotes, the new status. This is the concept of being in a multi-stakeholder environment. You are all equal. And that's the structure that IGF adopts. We go to that meeting and everybody has an equal vote, whether you are the boss or not. Merit-based. That's on multi-stakeholderism. It has its limit in the sense that over time the wazees start having a clout. Okay, so what Walubengo says tends to have more weight than what a newbie says. And it's fine in the beginning, but it can be abused because once the newbies have learned the tricks, they will say something more sensible than what I could say. And if we don't have honest wazees, they tend to push their weight around. So that's the weakness with multi-stakeholderism in the sense that it looks good on paper, but with time you find that some wazees exploit the age advantage or the experience advantage. Not all. If you met Vint Cerf, you'll be shocked how down to earth the dude is. He'll listen to you even if you graduated yesterday. And very politely agree or disagree with you. But then you can have his peers who are exactly extremely the opposite. Their point could be useless, and they perhaps know it is useless, but now they'll use their clout to push it through. So it's not necessarily like the best structure, but it is what has worked over time, as opposed to a state-driven system, like what you have in the African Union, where Kenya's position is this, whether the Kenyans like it or not, but it is the Kenyan government position. In internet governance forums, it is sort of an equalizing place where merit counts. So as we come to the end, we have private sector. They'll continue to have an impact on how the internet evolves. We'll have governments with regulations, whether they are AI-based regulations or they are data privacy-related regulations. Those will also affect how the internet evolves. And most regulations would be global, continental, or country-specific. The social layer especially is managed by the state. Cybercrime Act, once it has passed, what you do online with respect to cybercrime becomes enforceable. And what we require you to do is whenever such bills or such laws are being discussed, you have to be at the table, because now you will be the guiding light to members of parliament. Quite a few of our alumni were, picked by parliament as researchers in the digital space, or they are consulted to date whenever there is a digital issue under discussion. So net neutrality is the concept that once I submit my message on the internet, there should be no discrimination between when I submitted it and up to until when the recipient gets it. Okay, so some ISPs had gotten into the habit of favoring some traffic over the other, particularly the big players. So for example, if I'm Google and I come up with a product called YouTube, then some competitor somewhere in India creates another YouTube. In my big capacity, I could be in a position to slow down the Indian YouTube so that my American YouTube has a better service offering. It has better quality. It has, so there are these underhand tactics that made net neutrality an issue. But at the moment, I think most people agree to keep all packets equal on the internet, as they say, except in authoritarian governments where they don't. Cybercrime, I think I'd already talked about that. Data privacy, there's a unit or a chapter on that, but essentially, your personal data needs to be protected, because if it goes in the wrong hands, it can be used against you. So increasingly across the globe, there are privacy laws kicking in. Kenya had one in 2019. Our data commissioner is very active. I think she may appear during the IGF at the end of the month, so you'll get to know her. But essentially, the privacy issues are super important. And once you learn the 8 principles of data privacy, we expect you to be like the activists, put government to check, making sure they're not violating their own privacy laws, and agitate for greater adoption of the same. I think that is the end of my presentation. Back to Judy. If there's any question, I could be able to answer it, but I'll need to drop off maybe in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Mr. Walubengo. Yes, we can obviously see the passion. So we can go on and on. I'm not seeing any questions on the chat, unless somebody has a burning question, but we will still have Mr. Walubengo in the next Zoom session next week on Thursday, and we can still have the opportunity to ask then.
Okay. So I'm free to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So apologies for running over time, but I hope it was worth it. We encourage you to go on with your lesson. By the time we get to the weekend, you should have been done with your lessons 1, 2, 3, and 4, because those ones will no longer be available from Monday. So please make the effort and ensure that you are through, so that into the coming week we begin lesson 5. So we are still available on WhatsApp if there's anything that you may want addressed, or if you're having a challenge, please do not hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, thank you very much and do have a good evening.